I built an AI agent that builds other AI agents. It's never been easier to build AI agents and automations. 2 years ago, you'd need above average technical skills, probably to hire some developers, and you'd have slow iterative testing, which might take hours or days. And all of that just to get a fairly bog standard basic AI agent. Unlike today, where we have simple drag and drop interfaces, pre-built templates, and affordable software and tools, and so many more resources that make building AI agents more accessible to everyone. And this AI agent that I'm about to share with you in this video makes the whole process even easier. After you answer a couple of questions, it will generate a fully fledged AI agent N8N workflow for your business. It plans the agent flow, it writes a comprehensive prompt, it even finds the right tools, and then at the end of it, spits out a fully working N8N workflow ready for you to test. Now, it's not perfect, but it does 90% of the job for you instead of you spending hours on planning and not knowing where to start with the prompt. So today we'll cover examples of agents it can build. As well as an overview of how it works so that you can build something similar for yourself. Let's jump straight into it. So it starts off with a form trigger. So we're going to hit test step. And the agent architect is designed to return a complete AI agent or LLM chain, depending on what's best, full with prompts, nodes, and connected tools where appropriate, ready for you to test and edit. So it returns a comprehensive prompt in a critics prompt structure, which is constraints, role, inputs, tools, if appropriate, instructions, conclusions, and solutions. My own framework for writing comprehensive prompts, which I've covered in a separate prompting tutorial, which I'll link to. But what we're going to do is we're going to start off by being asked a few questions to understand our goals for this agent. So it's going to take us to this page where we've got the agent architect and we're asked a few questions and we're just going to fill it out. And the more descriptive we can be here, the better quality our prompt and outputs are going to be. So we need to fill out the goal of our agent. So in this case, let's simulate that we want a calendar management agent. So we're going to put manage my Google Calendar, create events, delete events, update. Does it need access to any tools? In this case, we know it does, but if you're not sure, hit not sure, and the LLM will determine whether it needs tools or not based on your other answers. If yes, what tools or APIs should the agent have access to? In here, we're going to put Google Calendar. What are the expected inputs? So we probably want a chat trigger with natural language. The expected outputs here are just to take actions in my calendar. Does it require a specific JSON output format? So sometimes we build agents that have specific output formats. In this case, it's just going to take actions in my calendar, so we don't need an output format. But if yours is processing data and you need it to be output in a certain way, then we just write examples here of the output format without the JSON tags in a comma separated list. So we might have name, name of contact, comma, total price of order. So just giving it an idea of the variables that are going to be output in your data. So we'll hit next. And at this point, we've done the form trigger and we move into the next stage of flow, which is asking clarifying questions. So we have an LLM stage here that determines based on our goals, our inputs, our expected outputs, what questions it should ask. And it then throws open a new form page to ask us that question. And credit to Jim Lee UK from the N8N community who came up with this ingenious idea to go back to the user and ask these feedback questions to build the amount of information that we send to our next stages of the flow. We come back here to the form. So we're going to come back here to the form and it's got our initial query down here, manage my Google Calendar, create events, delete events, update. But then it's going to ask us specific questions that dig deeper. And the reason it does this is to build out a more comprehensive and specific prompt ready for us to test it at the end. So when creating or updating events, do you need to specify event attributes such as start or end times, location, description? Which of these are mandatory? So we're going to put just attendees here. Should the functionality include handling recurring events or events with complex invitation setups? Let's just go for single meetings for now to make it simpler. Do you require any confirmation before deleting or updating events? So without even prompting it, it's understood that actually maybe some human intervention might be required at some point. So we'll get confirmation before deleting, not before updating. Beyond basic creation, deletion, and updates, are there any additional calendar related operations that you would like integrated? Let's get our calendar events so that we know our availability. Should the natural language processing be optimized to distinguish intent for different actions? And do you have a preference for any specific command phrasing? So it's going a bit off track here, not really relevant. Let's just put no, and hopefully it doesn't think anything of that. Are there any additional integrations with other services that should be linked to these calendar actions? So maybe we want to be notified by Gmail of when something happens, when an action is taken. So we've answered all of the questions here, and those were 6 questions that were passed through. And in this prompt here, for the clarification LLM, we're effectively telling it that you need to dig deeper based on the goals and inputs and outputs you've received, in particular about the names of software and tools, as well as asking about functionalities, and ask the optimal number of questions. But if the query is clear to start with, no need to ask more questions. So the more detailed your inputs, the fewer questions that are going to come back. We then move to the second phase of the flow after those questions are asked in a form loop here. And this is the bulk of the flow creation. So we've got this agent builder stage here, which is broken down into 2 separate tools agents with very specific tasks. The first is a prompt agent, which is my prompt agent tool that I created in a separate tutorial that effectively creates a critics structured prompt, which is constraints, role, inputs, tools, instructions, conclusions, solutions. So a really comprehensive prompt structure. And you'll see in the outputs that this gives a really comprehensive prompt output. We've then given it access to 2 specific tools, so the web search tool and the tools database. And the web search tool is so that it can go out and understand what tools are available by searching perplexity with the search term parameter. But also we've connected a tools database, which I'll show you shortly, that has a list of N8N native tools and methods that it can use, and therefore understands which tools it can access directly and which ones it needs to create HTTP requests for. So we're going to come back out here. The second key stage, again connected to the same 2 tools, is the tools agent. Now the tools agent is specifically designed to select the most appropriate tools for a given AI agent input prompt by searching the tools section in that prompt, if appropriate, select the right ones that exist in N8N, and then go and find the information about the API documentation to create a HTTP request when one does not exist. So we've told it in here to search for relevant tools, to analyze the user's prompt to determine appropriate tools and parameters based on the agent's function and tools section. First, check the tools database for which tools and methods are native to N8N, and I'll show you that in a minute. It's a work in progress, and we'll iteratively add more tools to that. Return the JSON of the tool so that it can create the workflow. But if no tools are relevant, then move on to this next step, which is if there aren't relevant tools, but the prompt says we need tools, then we're going to need to connect via API or HTTP requests. So if there aren't any relevant tools, it needs to use the web search tool and search for something like required tool, API endpoint and parameters to complete the desired function and link back to that API documentation. So it goes out and searches for the API docs, the endpoints, etc., for other tools, and then hopefully populates that into our HTTP request tool. And then we've added an example of how to populate the HTTP request here. So that tool is specifically designed to go and understand what tools are available. And then once it's understood that, we've got a really comprehensive prompt. We've got a list of the tools with the JSON of those tools. And we're then passing it into that final stage, which is the node generation, which is how we translate a prompt and a set of tools that are attached to it into a fully working N8N workflow. So this last stage is about turning the information from the agent builder into a fully fledged working N8N workflow and actually creating that workflow in our environment. So doing the whole step for us. And this is part of a larger project that I'm working on to create fully fledged working N8N workflows, which I'll be releasing soon. But believe it or not, this is just a sub flow of that major workflow to focus purely on AI agents because they're becoming such a prominent thing in the workflow space. So the master workflow will be able to call on this flow to create all of the AI agents or LLM chains. So once it's created that workflow, it will actually return the form to us, and you can access it by highlighting the link and opening that link. And you can see it's returned something like this. So we've got a chat trigger on the left-hand side with a note around it. It's named this calendar management agent and given it a description, handles calendar operations with required confirmations and email notifications. It's a bit ghastly in how it looks, and it's connected these in an incorrect way. If we delete all these, it's actually got all the relevant components set up for us. So we've got Open Router by default here through the OpenAI node. We've got a window buffer memory. It has given us the incorrect agent, but you'll see inside here that we've got a fully fledged prompt, and even down to the point where it's labeled out all of the different tools. So create event, we're going to pass these fields, delete event, these fields or parameters, and then Gmail, we're going to send a message, and then built out all of the instructions for this. So you can see how this would massively speed up your process because you'd be able to immediately come into here, connect all the relevant tools if this was correctly a tools agent, and we'd be able to go into each of these nodes, which is handily named, create event, delete event, and you can see that they are all the correct event types, even the Google Mail send message. And we'd just be able to come in here, automatically let the model define the parameters for all of those, connect up everything, connect our chat trigger. And although it's selected the incorrect agent here, we've got this fully fledged prompt, which we can copy and paste to a tools agent. So not a bad start. And it also looks pretty good. It's kept it pretty neat apart from the lines there. So we'll come back to the flow now. And I want to show you a couple of the key dependencies here so that you don't go away thinking this can build absolutely anything, because it does have dependencies and it's limited in its functionality. However, it's still going to save us a lot of time, and I'll build this over time to be better and better, especially when it gets incorporated into a larger N8N workflow builder. But the first thing we'll look at is this tools database and how we're storing that data. And then I'll cover the prompts in more detail so you can see exactly what's happening here so you're able to recreate this for yourself. If you fancy just making it easier and getting the template for this, then head to school.com/scrapes. And inside here, inside the classroom, you can head to plug and play templates, which has all the templates from YouTube and more, and head to the agent essentials section here. And we've got the AI agent builder. It'll be built out with more of a description, and you're just going to download the template from here and load it into your N8N environment. We're then also going to provide the link to the Airtable, which has access to all of the different tools, as you'll see in a moment. So I'm going to jump now into the tools database. So at the moment, I've just got an Airtable in scrapes.ai tutorials, which you'll have the link to in the school community. And what this has is a list of all of the different tool names, or the ones that I've populated so far. So we've got 27 different types of tools that we can use here, and the relevant JSON code you can see. So for example, let's go down to a more complex one like Google Mail. We'll copy that and we'll go back into our workflow here and we'll paste that in here. And you can see it's got all of the Google Mail tools as separate tools. So not just the tool, each function, send message. So each function and each resource has just pasted in from the JSON taken from the Airtable. So that's how it knows when the tools agent's selecting what tools it has available, because it sees the Gmail name or description or finds something similar to that. And then in the JSON, it searches out the relevant JSON node in order to pass to the create AI nodes section. Now, a limitation here is I've only populated 27 different tool names, and there's a lot more than that in N8N. So any that it doesn't recognize in this, it will not be able to create that tool yet. But as we go over time in the school, I'm going to continue to update this template so that it has all of the relevant tools and can build better workflows. But right now, I've included some of the core ones that myself and the community use. So Google Calendar, Outlook, some vector databases here with Pinecone and Supabase. We've got other databases like Google Sheets, as well as some things like Ghost Blog, Bubble if you want to manage your website, and some core functionality in there as well. So this is a limitation of it at the moment, but it still has quite a lot of data that it can access at the moment, and this is going to be built out. And I want to show you deep into the prompts, but before that, there's a few things you need to change. One of them is that you need to update your own instance URL. So in this set base URL, I've got my URL for my base URL for my workflows. You need to update this to yours because otherwise the link that's output at the end will be invalid. But you don't even need the link. You can just go to your homepage and you will see that it's output that flow. And you can see that it gives it this kind of name, and you can change this all in the prompt. But what I wanted was to output a clean flow with a good prompt that generates consistently and can speed up my development process. So we've already taken a look at the prompt agent. So let's dig into the tools agent to understand what the prompt is asking for, as well as the create AI nodes agent here. And then what I'll do is I'll show you a bunch of examples with different inputs and exactly what this is output to set your expectations of the quality of outputs, because it's going to be variable. But like I mentioned, it's going to save you a lot of time either way. So let's jump into the tools agent prompt so you can have a look in detail exactly what's going on here. You're an expert at selecting the most appropriate tools for a given AI workflow and prompt. So it receives the prompt from the prompt agent tool, and it needs to understand from that prompt, by looking at the tools section and also the prompt, what tools are required, if any, and it's going to return the relevant tool names as well as the code for the N8N JSON. And it's going to do that by finding that in the tools database. So if tools are not mentioned, let's not return anything so that we don't disrupt the next stage when we're building out an agent. So the inputs we've already spoken about is taking an input prompt, and the instructions are the really important part, which is actually it's going to search for the relevant tools, and it's going to search our Airtable database. If the tools exist, i.e. they're native to N8N, then it will return the JSON of that tool as well as the name for any tools. Now, there are more efficient ways to do it than searching an Airtable and passing in all that context, but this is kind of a first version, a quick and dirty way to extract the relevant data and test if this approach would actually work. And it seems like it does. So you probably extend this by putting all that data in a vector database so you can search semantic things rather than exact names like Google Drive or Google Mail. You just search email tools and then understand what tools you could pick from. However, if no relevant tools are found, and we'll test this out, then it should assume that it's using a HTTP request. So it should define that HTTP request and pass in the relevant parameters as well as the values based on a web search it makes using the web search tool. So in simple terms, it's going to, if a tool in N8N doesn't exist already, then it's going to search Perplexity for the required API documentation and attempt to fill that out for us in that HTTP request with mixed success. And then it gives it a little bit of information of how to fill out a HTTP request, because when I was testing this, like I said, it's mixed success in actually filling out this successfully, but we put in some placeholder values here. And all of this is just returning the name in JSON for each code tool, which is passed as additional information into this create AI nodes tool, which is the really powerful prompt that creates an actual working N8N flow. So the final piece of the puzzle here is actually this, what we've called node generation. So you receive all these inputs of the prompt and the relevant tools in JSON, and it outputs an actual workflow that then is created as a workflow. So let's look into the prompt. You're an expert N8N workflow designer, and your task is to generate complete N8N workflow JSON configurations, but this is focused purely on AI agent and LLM nodes based on the user descriptions which are input. you understand the technical specifications and can properly structure workflows that implement them correctly. We've given it a ton of constraints, and the reason we've done that is actually we want it to style in the way that we like. So when I was testing this, it would output these horrific looking flows with positioning all over the place, names that didn't relate to what was happening. But if you look at all of these nodes, it's actually named them all for us based on the events. And this is how I like to name it. So I've given it these standards in the constraints. So create event, get events, and you can see underneath that that is the action it's taken. And then Gmail, it's got send message. So there's not much work we need to do to it, basically, is what we wanted to get to. And then we've put, we must include the example AI agent and LLM node structures. So one thing it struggles to do without giving it the context is to create actual AI agents. And we saw before it created a conversational agent instead of a tools agent. So I'm going to try and fix that in the prompt. And then this is where it actually places the prompt. So replace prompt goes here with the actual prompt text received in the input. And in the inputs, we receive the prompt and then the tools/function calls that are needed. And that's passed from tools agent. And then we've got a series of instructions that effectively it's trying to work out whether to use the AI agent node, i.e. are we using tools and we have function calls, or a basic LLM chain? Because if we don't need an AI agent for it, then we could just use a basic LLM chain. And then some styling as well around proper tool names, workflow names, etc. And you can see because of the JSON output parser that we've put in here, it returns a complete JSON, which we're then able to pass into our create workflow node, which is an N8N node inside N8N that creates a workflow, stringifies all the input, which outputs a workflow at the end of it. We're then just setting the URL based on what that's output so that we can pass the URL back to the user, but that gives us a flow that looks like this. And the JSON output parser back here effectively tells all of the different objects like properties, name, nodes, that if you were to copy and paste one of these nodes into a note here, you'd see the JSON parameters in here, like nodes, parameters, connections, etc. And that JSON output parser just sets the output to be that. So that is the essence of the workflow. I'm now going to show you a few quick demos of it working in action, so you can see the success rate or unsuccess rate. I managed to fix the issue where it was throwing an old version. So in the code, it was sending the wrong version type. So I've reiterated in the prompt to make sure that it sends the correct type version, for example here, of a specific node, to make sure that we're using the latest type version there. So that's another limitation here, because actually we're restricted to updating this each time that N8N updates a specific tool. So let's give some other use cases a go and see how it performs. Then I'll just quickly touch as well on the models we're using for each different stage. So for the clarification LLM, we want a bit more structured planning and reasoning. So we've used O3 Mini there. For the agent builder stages, I'm actually using Claude 3.7 Sonnet, and it seems to be spitting out good results there. Same cost as Claude 3.5 Sonnet, and we know that that has good writing ability, so it works for the prompts. I'd recommend, if you try this, to try different models, cheaper models, because actually this can get a little bit expensive when you're testing and testing and testing, but it's definitely worth it for the time saved if it puts out a good flow. And then over here, we're using Claude 3.5 Sonnet for the creation of nodes. But again, you could probably use something a little cheaper, like 4.0 Mini, test out if that works. But I know that it works well, Claude 3.5 Sonnet, with this auto-fixing output part, which when we're creating such a structured response for a JSON, I think is really important. So I've kept it in here whilst I'm testing. So the first one we're going to quickly test and run through is the one you're probably wondering most about, is can this create a HTTP request when the tool is not found? So I found a website called Dummy.json, which provides free API data, so we can access it for free. And if you go to dummyjson.com/products, you can actually pull all this fake product data from there. So what we're going to do is just tell it in the prompt to get a list of products from dummyjson.com. Yes, it needs tools, which is the dummyjson API, and we're expecting product data, and there's no specific outputs. So I've just come back, and we're going to open the workflow now and check out whether that's worked. So it's looking pretty good, actually. We've got the chat trigger, so not the manual trigger. And I know that that's because in the prompt, I've told it to put the chat trigger in every time. It's labeled this products retrieval agent. It's even linked us to the API documentation. So we've not said anything about this API documentation. It's linked us to that. Let's check. And it works as well. So it has picked up that. We've got a retrieve products HTTP request down here. Use this tool to retrieve the complete product catalog from dummyjson.com. So it's filled that out for us, and it's got the correct URL, and it's named it retrieve products. So actually pretty good. We'll connect the model up and just make sure it's correct. GPT-4o Mini. We've got the chat there, and it's got the prompt in here. Correct. So it's got the role. It's almost done that correctly. The date there. And without even reading it, let's just try and run it. So all we're going to do is open the chat here and click run. Let's see if it retrieves the products. And we can see already it's sent a blank query because all you have to do is send a GET request to this. And it's actually returned all these products. So there's a lot of data coming back. So I guess it's just taking a while because it's going to process that data and return it to us. But it's worked successfully. It's actually set that up all for us, and even linked us to the API documentation so we can troubleshoot if not. So next one we're going to try is see how my Google Ads campaign is performing. And I know that Google Ads is one of the tools that I put in the tools database. Does it need access to any tools? We're going to test, not sure this time. Expected inputs are a natural query, and expected outputs are add campaign details, no specific output format. Let's give that a go. So our Google Ads performance agent, as it's called it, has added the correct tool. So we even put not sure, but actually it's figured out what tool. It's not putting any of these values, but we can just come in here and let the model define them. And it's got the campaign. So it's understood that we want to get a specific campaign. We probably could have had it get many campaigns to understand the campaign details. And then it's got the full built out prompt, and it said for the last 7 days, get the campaign performance. So I think that's pretty good. The next one we're going to look at is a Hacker News summary into our inbox daily. So we're going to choose Outlook this time, and we've told it to include example at googlemail.com in copy. Yes, it needs access to tools, Hacker News, and Outlook. We're not expecting any outputs. No output specified. Let's see how it handles that. So we're coming back here to see how our Hacker News summarizer agent has done. So it's connected to a HTTP request for getting top news stories, as well as news story details. I'm not sure if that is correct without going and looking at it. What's disappointing about this one is there was a Hacker News tool inside the tools database, so it obviously hasn't picked that up. And then it has sent an Outlook email here, message send, so that's correct. But it hasn't added the field CC recipients, and that's probably because in the tools database, we don't have these additional fields all ticked, so it probably doesn't know that. So that is another limitation of this. So this one was a bit less successful. So hopefully with those examples, you can see how powerful this workflow could potentially be if we had a few more things in place, like a semantic database that would reduce the cost of running it, as well as speed up the search and make it more accurate. And a key dependency we're missing here is all of the node data. So to be able to extract that from N8N would make this a really powerful workflow. But actually, you can use this right now as is, and it will speed up your workflow. In particular, creating the agents and a full prompt that's connected to relevant tools is really, really powerful.